So, folks, good afternoon from India. Before we start today's session, I would like to give you a short info on what Be Singular is doing. Be Singular is a unique platform that empowers the next generation to create real and responsible impact in the world by working with technologies of the future. We teach exponential technologies to make our next gen better place to solve global great challenges. Uh, we also, within Be Singular, we have Future Leaders Club, which is a by invitation club only, comprising of community of young dreamers who wish to work together and help change the world. We also do our coaching online and as well as in the physical mode. Be Singular Social, which is primarily backing this webinars, is a non-profit entity that has been launched by Be Singular in collaboration with the Banyan, a leading child daycare center chain. Our objective at Be Singular is to invest our resources that help foster exceptional educational experiences and learning for the families. I have a pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Wolfgang Pengler. Wolfgang is the world's lead economist in finance, competitiveness, and innovation for Europe and Central Asia. Aftershock 2020 featured him as one of the world's 100 leading futurists, and the German weekly Der Spiegel called him a big data virtuoso. In today's webinar, he will share some interesting insights on how the longevity has changed over the course of human history, with people living on an average of 35 years earlier to the present generation, where we will live twice as long as the historical average. Presenting to you today from Be Singular Social, Wolfgang Pengler.
Thank you so much for that very nice introduction. It's a pleasure, and I'm proud to be part of Be Social's webinar series. As you just said, these are very unique times, and we're asking ourselves much more often this question: how long will I live? And I'm not a fortune teller. I'm trying to do some interesting math exercises with you and all the audience, but it's still a question we will ask ourselves more fundamentally. And obviously, we all want to live a longer and prosperous life as well. And we have the chance to definitely live longer than our parents have lived and grandparents. But it's not guaranteed. And I had this experience personal. I had a wonderful mother. She was a very young mother. But she died very early, suddenly. She died at the age of 40. That was the picture just taken before she died. She died in a car accident. I was already an adult, so I was somehow benefiting from her love and upbringing. That was one of the first times in my life, although at that time I was 21, asked myself, how long will I live and what can I do to avoid the risks she was exposed to? And how can I make sure that my children also live in a more prosperous environment? Now, while it sounds shocking for some, if you lose your mother at age 40, historically, it's been the norm. So historically, you were lucky to live till 40. And if you think of your own family and your grandparents and your great-grandparents, I bet you hear many stories that some brother, some sibling, some mother, some father died also as early as my mother has died. And it's only the last basically 200 years since sanitation improved, since healthcare improved, since economic condition improved, that people lived longer. And those of you connected from India would even relate to this just 100 years ago. And I lived also in Africa, where this was only just 50, 60 years ago that people lived not so long lives. And it's only our generation and our parents' generation to some extent that are lucky to live longer. And what's interesting for those who are interested in demographic dynamics and population growth is you see a very similar curve with the number of people. So since we lived longer, we also had more people, which already should make you question if people say we have a problem with population growth. It's actually the other way around. Is since people live longer, we have more people. So actually population growth is a sign of a good thing. We have to manage it, but only since people lived longer, we had more people. Population has gone not because of too many babies, it's actually because of more and more adults. And what's interesting, again, from a very historic perspective, there's been only 200 years ago that the world reached the first billion. So India now has more than 1 billion people, but the whole world was smaller than India is today just 200 years ago. And then 2.5 billion was at the time when my mother was born. And now we're obviously going to that, what some would call the exponential curve, that's also flattening, because as I'll show in a second, we have a now different dynamic. But since then, since some of our parents were born, then we had this rapid population growth. But as I said just before, don't be scared of it, because we have achieved most of it anyway already, because we're getting close to 8 billion now, and in total it'll be probably not more than 10 billion. So the big journey on population growth is anyway over. Not for everybody. India is still in the middle of it, and you can make an opportunity out of that. Now, if at school, or those of you who are still in school or have been in school recently, you may have seen that picture. It's a classic population pyramid. If you're still in school or university, ask your teacher, does it still exist? Because they may still believe that's the fundamental picture of the world, and that's wrong. The current picture of the world, and the midpoint, by the way, what I just showed you was 1980, so not so long ago from my perspective. This was the midpoint till 2050. That was 2015. Doesn't look like a pyramid anymore. You could still see some shades, but you see more and more people, maybe like the audience now, in their 20s, 30s, being added up. But what is happening the next 20, 30 years? Actually, you'll not see more children, but you see many more adults. And so more people, but not more children. And soon it will become like a bell or even a barrel in many countries. Some countries, like my home country, has more old people than young people. But over the next decades, we'll see a balance across the generations. And as I just said, it's a good thing, because people live longer. People can live longer than my mother lived, and we want that. Now, people still think there is rapid population growth. It's actually wrong. And again, that should help you challenge that mindset. Maybe somebody is on the audience who is born in the year 1968, or some of your parents are. If yes, then you were the peak of humanity, so to say. It's the only year where most people were added ever in relative terms. So this is the only year, I think it was 2.04% population growth. It was a large number. It's a number that India had not so long ago as well, but India is also coming down from that number. And since then, it's almost like a sliding pace. There was a little other bump in the 80s. Had to do with some of the demographic cohorts that are reflected from that 1968 bump. It was a historic year, close to a German historic year, 1988, when you had most people added ever. There was 93 million. And now you may ask how many people are being added every year. The answer is the size of Germany, 80 million. So 80 million, and how many people do we have in the world today? The number is 7.7 billion now already, almost. So that means we are close to 1%. So if you divide 80 divided by 7.7 billion, you get a number that's slightly above 1%. And in the next few years, we'll go below this threshold of 1%, which we haven't had since the 1950s. You see the data was a bit shaky from 1900 to 1950. But it's clear, the relative number is going down. The absolute number is still sizable, but we're living in an age of rapid population slowdown from a high level. So it's like you're driving on a highway, you're still driving fast, but you're getting slower and slower. But that's the new environment. That's why some countries are now having problems with too few people. I recently was in a seminar in Serbia. The whole question was around depopulation. How can you fight depopulation? Very interesting how the debates changed. I don't think in India you will have that debate yet, but in China you may get there. In Brazil it will happen. And so in the world it is, as I said, it's a balance, but that's the world picture on population growth, the pure number. That's what I want to show you, just simple pure numbers. And so you may then ask the next question, why is there slowdown now? Why is it happening? And obviously you can have very deep discussions around education and urbanization and many other reasons. What I do is very simple, much simpler. I want to just show you the number of births and the number of deaths. So birth minus death is population growth. That's obviously very simple math. So as I said, we have the number of 80 million more people every year. That means if we have 140 million births, that means we need to have 60 million deaths, which comes in a second. question here you can ask yourself is now, and that question I'm asking you, is this number that's now 2020, 141 million new births, is it going up or is it going down? Because eventually either birth have to go down or death have to go up to make population growth smaller. So let's repeat, either birth have to go down or death have to go up. Otherwise we'll get not a smaller number. So the question is birth going down or up? And the answer is it's actually neither. It's just staying flat. But sometimes the funny, nice thing when you do this data exercise is you see flat lines, surprising flat lines. So the number, the projection now is a pure flat line. That already started in the 2000s, more or less, around 140 million, a flat line of birth in the world. And India is making a big contribution to that number, but increasingly African countries do. Now deaths, as I said, has to be 60 million, otherwise it wouldn't add up with the 80 million population growth. And it may be surprised now, despite all the good work, despite a lot of exponential health technologies, the number of deaths will go up. And we get then this gap of almost around 30 million by the second half of the century of very small population growth. Projection by the UN is still there will be population growth. There's some counter projection that say we may even reach a peak in 2075. But at least for the time we are now counting 2050 and slightly after, there will still be population growth. But it's more death. That's indeed quite interesting, especially in, again, today's environment where some people think we can live forever, but other people think we'll die tomorrow of COVID. And there, I think we need to find a middle ground. But the interesting, simple insight of why is death going up, it's a good thing. So strange that sounds, it's because we have more old people and eventually we'll die. And if you have more people in the world, there'll be more death. That's just, again, very simple. But again, these simple things need to be understood, and that chart will help you. So birth stable, death is going up. Hard to change that because people will go, there are more old people eventually die. And that means then that you get shorter, less population growth. So let's come to the last few slides before we open it up for discussion and before I do the exercise with you about that fundamental question that we started with. It's an interesting question what people die actually from. That's a question, why do people die? By the way, that is, and what age do people die? I have these numbers too if you're interested. But given now the current global situation, let's just ask ourselves, what do people die from? And most is heart disease. So these are some of the technical health terms. Ischemic heart disease is some are normal heart disease, which you might die from, or your grandmother, if she's already in her 90s, or your grandfather. There's still a stroke. There's a lot of respiratory diseases, which is number 3 and 4. It's both children and adults, many of them in Asia, many in India. Alzheimer's is going up a lot. Cancer is one of the top numbers. Road injuries, and I mentioned the case of my mother, more than 1 million. AIDS around 1 million. So in short, you have 2 big diseases in the world, heart-related diseases and cancer. They are roughly half of these 30 million. And then you have many others, lung diseases, liver, HIV/AIDS, car accidents, suicide, murder, but they're all below 1 million. So they all obviously have to add up to the 60 million. What's interesting again for the audience here, and I use this separation of 65 years, because for the first time in human history, you have actually more old people dying than young people, which again is a good thing because in the old days, young people died. And now if we define the retirement age as a threshold, then you see that more old people died. It was 50-50, but still you see a lot of light blue. The light blue means young people. So in the heart disease, you still have young people and stroke, but it's way less than half. Chronic respiratory diseases is also an old age phenomenon, but lower respiratory diseases are for a lot of children as well. Neonatal is obviously by definition pure child death, but look at road injuries. Out of these 1.5 million, almost 1 million people die at younger as adults or as children. HIV even more extreme. So these are, data that we can even refine and think about India or other countries. How can you actually target certain things? What is the big challenge for countries like India? This is the world's picture. So let me put this now in the context of COVID, where the data is still fluid. especially on China, but we use the official China data now here that's also been reported by Johns Hopkins, and to make you understand the perspectives, because you can have two perspectives. One is actually not a big number, the COVID death. We are talking about 50,000 now in the world, and you just saw that we had already we will have 60 million deaths this year. It means 15 million people will have already died. So 50,000 compared to 15 million is not a big number. But as we know from exponentials, if it doubles, it goes up very quickly. And if it doubles 10 times, we have 500 million people. So that's the reason why we are on in lockdown. Now, you can also look at it differently, which is this chart. If you look at COVID death from the probably lower number than there should be in China, but still if you use this as an exercise, then for China this year, the number will be very low. It will be not among the top 20 deaths. For China in February, it will still be noticeable. For Hubei province, where Wuhan is based, it is very noticeable for this year. But for Wuhan in February, it was a leading cause of death, and it added to the death almost more than 7%. And so if Wuhan or Hubei had been everywhere all the time, China would be in a disastrous situation. And that's again why you need to put these numbers in perspective. A different perspective you get from Italy, where again the hope is that the peak has been reached. But again, if I use that mortality mapping that I had before, and Italy again is an older country, dementia is bigger, stroke and heart disease are even more prevalent. COVID-19 made it to the top 10 in February, March, and there's a likelihood it will make it to the top 5. And if you take the most affected regions, then you see this extreme situation. So those numbers help you a little bit to put things in perspective. For now, 50,000 or even 100,000 is a very low number compared to 60 million deaths, especially obviously if it doesn't trigger more heart disease death and more other type of death or stroke death, because people who have a stroke now might not be cared for because the hospitals are overloaded. At the same time, people even argue that because of better pollution now in some countries, including Delhi and India, you get some other diseases less. And that is some exercise I want to do in the next few weeks. Very simple math again, as I showed you before. Take India. How many people died in February, March? Is it more or less? And it's an interesting question, and you should find out too, because the answer is not obvious. And once you have the answer, you can go down to each of these causes and find out which went up and which went down. With this, let me go into one of my favorite machines that started this project. And if you're online, you can do it yourself now. I'll play it for myself now, and I'll disclose my birthday. So you go to Population.io, and once you're on the website, then you see this machine, which has a total population, which is now, again, quite high, something we should always remember, that we often operate with numbers that are 3-4 years old, and 3-4 years have made a lot of difference in the world, and especially in a country like India. And you see every second babies being born, people added to the global population still growing, even if it's slower than it used to be, it's still more than 2.5 people per second, because how many seconds are there in the world? 31 million seconds, and 60 million people, 80 million more people. That means roughly 2.5 people per second are added to the world's population. Even more babies being born is even more. So this is just the people added. Anyway, you type in your birthday, in my case, January 20, 1971, and you put your country and you put your gender, and then the machine runs. I already pre-ran it, so you have a look. And this is also, let me explain you, because it was a really nice data exercise, and it got us to many other different things. So I want to also encourage all you, especially the young techpreneurs, if you dream of some project, just do it and put it out there, and then it'll get its own life. So I'm now in this, although I still felt young at some point until I did this project, and I'm already reaching the 75% mark in the world. So 75% of the world is younger than I am. So that's a little disappointing. And now less than 2 billion are older than I am. And you see the number is ticking. And the way this works is, think of yourself that you were born in a certain moment that nobody else was born in that millisecond. And it gives you a position in the world. That position obviously changes. You were at some point number 1 at the second you were born, but very quickly you moved up because other babies were born, and you keep moving up in this long global train of people. And in my case, I'm now at the position 5.8 billion. I'll soon reach my 6 billionth mark. And so that's how the machine was calculated. In Germany, I'm still okay. So I'm exactly in the middle in Germany. I'm, as you see, behind that bulge of those people born in the 60s. But also there, I reached the halfway tipping point. You can play with the site a lot. I'll just show you one of the other subsites that are being used by Bill Gates also, that and covered by Der Spiegel of the article that Nitesh quoted, which is the fundamental question: how long will I live? So again, I need to give you a warning here. Please don't be superstitious, because this is pure math, and it's you may live much longer. I expect you actually to live a little longer than this machine tells you, not because of the improvements that will happen, but because you're likely to be a little healthier and a little wealthier and a little better educated than the average that this calculates, because it assumes you're of average health and of average condition. But I'm living 35 still years I have to live. So I need to make the most out of these 35 years. As a German male, I live longer than most of these other countries, which are red. I live longer than the US, but I don't live longer than even, say, Italy. And that's also something that has been wrongly portrayed in the media, because in Italy, and sorry, let me just move this a bit here. In Italy, has actually a pretty decent healthcare system, and that's why people live longer there. I would live longer there. Also, there's the sea and other factors that may explain that. And it's just overwhelmed in some parts of Italy now. In Austria, that makes my Austrian friends very happy. I live also longer than in Germany, just slightly, which is an interesting also insight that I want to know more about. I haven't yet found out why. And if I would live in India, I'd live a bit shorter, but it's not as dramatic as some would expect, right? I would live still 27 years as a male of my age. Obviously, as a woman my age lives longer everywhere, at least on average 5 years. But still in India, I would have 27 years. The gap to Germany is 8 years. So it's still sizable, but it's not as dramatic as it was 10, 20 years ago. Obviously, if you're a child now, a baby, you have a bigger gap, because the chance of a baby dying in India is higher, much higher than in Germany. But if you overcome these first 5, 10 years, then you have a decent life expectancy, which you never had. So what I want you to take from this is, first, obviously, take a grain of salt, check it out, see if you believe some of this, but ask yourself, how can I live longer? What would it take? What kind of health risks should I avoid? Maybe also my region, how is Delhi compared to the rest of India? That would be actually an additional data model what can produce, and to make this even more granular, a bit like Google Maps. You start with a nice view and then you go deeper and deeper. And that fun with data everybody can do. You don't have to be a programmer, you just need a love for numbers and a love for the world around you, which is, I think, what Be Singular is also achieving and trying to do. So with this, I give it back to you, Nitesh, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. It was